Day in the political calendar as the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt launches his March budget. Here he is talking to the brilliant Camilla Tominey earlier today on GB News.
Likely to be the last budget before the general election. But British people are very smart. They recognise gimmicks. They don't want any tricks. What they will get on Wednesday is a prudent and responsible plan.
But I'm glad the Chancellor said it was likely to be the last budget before the election. If not, then they're planning to be in power for 6 years. But it is going to be the last budget. It's an important one. Should the Chancellor splash the cash in order to boost the economy, cut taxes and give his party a chance of another 5 years in power? Let's ask tonight's newsmaker, former government minister and broadcaster Anne Widdecombe. Anne, lovely to see you as always. Can Britain afford tax cuts?
I think Britain can't afford not to have tax cuts. Tax cuts are what promote growth, and there's been consistent evidence of that over many decades. You have tax cuts, you can push growth. And the one thing that this economy desperately needs now is to grow. Now, where I agree with Jeremy Hunt is where he says, the British public aren't stupid, and that if he has a great giveaway budget, then they're not going to be taken in by it when there's only a few months to go before a general election. But the fact is that he should have shown a lot more imagination and a lot more will in previous budgets. And he hasn't done that. And when he says prudent and careful and uses language like that, I suspect what he really means is unimaginative and more of the same.
I just spoke to Tom Bower earlier in the show, Anne. Of course, he's a political biographer and journalist. He described Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, as a failed politician. Would you agree?
Well, I certainly think he's a failed Chancellor, but then I think this entire government has failed. I mean, it's one fiasco after another, and it just hasn't done any of the things that it could have done, given the size of the majority that it has. So I think the whole government failed. I wouldn't just pick on the Chancellor.
The Chancellor has also said, Anne, that he's going to go to war on immoral Whitehall waste and axe civil service jobs. Are you convinced this will make a difference?
Oh, I'm convinced it would make a difference if it happened. But my immediate question to Jeremy would be, what the heck have you been doing over the last 4.5 years? What have you been doing? Why suddenly discover Whitehall waste just in the run-up to a general election? Silly man. I mean, does he think anybody's fooled by that?
Now, Anne, the government are still running a deficit, which means that day-to-day spending is such that more is going out than comes in. The national debt is over £2 trillion. Have politicians of all colours got to get honest with the public about the disastrous state of the nation's finances?
Well, I think everybody knew that once we took the measures that we took during COVID, that we were going to end up trillions in debt. I mean, if you pay people to stay at home, you're going to create that sort of problem. And nobody in their right senses imagines that you can just magic that away with a wand in your first year in office. Of course you can't. So inevitably, there is going to be debt for some time. That is why it's so imperative that they focus on growing the economy. For some reason, they're not focusing on that at all. It's as if they've got a money box in front of them and they're always counting up the pennies to make sure that the same number are there without ever actually asking, what do they do outside that money box to produce income? They don't ask themselves.
Well, you mentioned the magic money box, Anne. Of course, the issue is we have the deficit, we have the national debt. So the tax cuts that you crave would surely come from borrowing. That makes you sound like a socialist to me.
Well, I would be a socialist if I weren't doing it in order to produce economic growth, because it's growth which is going to get us out of the problems that we're in. And it's growth which is eventually, as it has done in the past, is going to mend the problems that the Exchequer has. All the Chancellor appears to be offering, we won't know until the budget, all he appears to be offering is very straightforwardly more of the same, not departing from where we are, despite the fact that where we are is not a good place.
And what excites you about Reform UK's proposals for the economy? I know that the party that you support revealed more details about what they would do in power just a couple of weeks ago.
Well, first of all, when we say we'll cut waste, we certainly will. And, we shan't be waiting until the next election to do it. As far as reform is concerned, you could start cutting waste right away. First week, you could start to cut waste and you could carry on doing that. Secondly, I utterly believe reform when they say that they will reduce taxes, because you have a lot of businessmen actually involved in reform who know very well that what you've got to do is produce incentives in the economy, not just, as I say, focus endlessly on the same pile of pennies.
Indeed. Now, Anne, finally, let me ask you about your reaction to the Prime Minister's unscheduled and relatively unprecedented statement about the threat of extremism on our democracy on Friday afternoon. Well,
where has he been? For the last 4 years, the threat of extremism in our democracy has been growing steadily. We've had MPs murdered. We've had violent demonstrations on the streets. We've had the police not doing very much. And, of course, we've got all the problems of uncontrolled immigration when you don't know who is coming in and what they might intend to do. So you've got all of those things which do add up to a danger. I wouldn't want to create a climate of fear and panic. That's not what I'm about at all. But I do think, he's come rather late to recognising what's been going on there for some time.
And briefly, if you can, do you think that the Conservatives will call for an election in May? Do you think a spring poll is more likely now post-budget? What's your best guess?
No, I think, as I have always thought, that if you're going to lose, and they certainly are, if you're going to lose, then you lose later rather than sooner. First of all, because you don't want to hand the opposition an immediate victory. But secondly, because you hope in a sort of political McCorberism, something might turn up.
Well, Anne Widdecombe might turn up. Surely that would transform their fortunes. Anne, always the highlight of the weekend. I'll catch you next Sunday. My thanks to former government minister, broadcaster and television personality Anne Widdecombe.